Let me be clear from the start. This is not a call to buy. This is not a price prediction. And this is not about believing silver is going to the moon. This is about structure. I am not selling silver yet because the conditions that would justify selling simply are not in place. Not emotionally, not technically, not structurally. Markets don't move because people are excited. They move when pressure resolves, and right now pressure is still building. Price is the least important signal. Right now, most people decide when to sell based on price. That's understandable, but it's also backward. Price is the last thing to change. Before price moves, inventories shift, settlement behavior changes, liquidity thins, premiums detach. Physical flows reroute, institutions reposition quietly. Those are the signals that matter, and none of them suggest a resolution has occurred yet. The paper market is still doing the work. As long as the paper market can absorb stress, price can remain contained, futures contracts can be rolled, shorts can be extended, volatility can be suppressed. This doesn't mean the system is healthy. It means it is still functioning. I don't sell into a market that is still absorbing pressure. I sell after pressure releases and the system regains balance. We are nowhere near balance. Physical behavior tells a different story. If silver were truly overvalued, physical demand would be fading. Premiums would compress, inventories would rebuild, delivery urgency would decline. That is not what is happening. Physical silver continues to behave as if price is irrelevant. Buyers are not waiting for pullbacks. They're securing supply. Fabricators are locking in metal. Long-term holders are not distributing into strength. This is not late cycle behavior. Why volatility is still suppressed? Markets often peak with volatility, not calm. Blow-off tops are loud. They attract attention. They create euphoria. Silver does not look euphoric. Volatility remains constrained. Participation is uneven. Retail enthusiasm is episodic, not manic. Institutions are cautious, not celebratory. That tells you something important. The move, whatever form it takes, has not completed its work. The inventory signal. Most people ignore. One of the most reliable signals in commodity markets is inventory behavior. When a market tops, inventory rebuilds. When a market bottoms or transitions, inventory drains. Silver inventories across key venues are not rebuilding meaningfully. They are tight, mobile, and sensitive to demand shifts. A market with unresolved inventory pressure is not a market I sell casually. Why central banks still matter. Indirectly, central banks don't buy silver the way they buy gold, but their behavior matters. High rates, persistent inflation, rising debt, and constrained monetary flexibility all create an environment where real assets retain optionality. Silver is not just an industrial metal. It is an option on disorder. As long as policymakers remain boxed in, that option remains valuable. Selling requires a different environment. I sell when liquidity is abundant, confidence is high, and systems appear robust. I sell when central banks are in control, not improvising. I sell when supply chains are loose, not tight. That environment does not exist right now. We are in a phase where fragility is being managed, not resolved. Why patience is a position. Doing nothing feels uncomfortable, especially when prices move. But patience is not inaction. It is positioning. Holding silver through unresolved structural pressure is not about conviction. It is about discipline. I'm not waiting for a headline. I am waiting for a change in behavior. What would make me sell? This matters. I would sell silver if physical premiums collapsed globally. I would sell if inventories rebuilt aggressively. I would sell if volatility spiked and participation became euphoric. I would sell if central banks regained policy flexibility and real rates stabilized convincingly. None of those conditions are present. Until they are, selling is premature. This is a risk management decision. Not selling does not mean ignoring risk. It means recognizing which risks matter. The risk of missing upside is emotional. The risk of selling too early in a structurally unresolved market is strategic. I choose strategy over emotion. Why tops don't look like strength? Most people imagine market tops as moments of obvious excess. Prices racing higher. Headlines everywhere. Universal agreement that an asset is the trade. That's rarely how real distribution works. Real selling happens quietly, gradually, and almost invisibly. It happens when liquidity is abundant and when buyers feel confident. It happens when volatility is high enough to provide exits, but not so high that it scares participants away. Silver is not in that phase. Strength without euphoria is not a top. It is a pause. The difference between distribution and pressure. Relief markets under stress behave differently than markets unwinding excess. Pressure relief looks like sideways action, controlled pullbacks, and steady absorption. Distribution looks like violent rallies sold into expanding volume on down days and weakening follow-through. Right now, silver shows more signs of pressure management than pressure release. The system is still working to contain imbalance. Why institutions don't sell the way retail thinks. Large holders do not sell because price looks high. They sell when conditions allow them to exit without collapsing the market. That requires depth. It requires participation. It requires belief. Institutions distribute when they can pass risk to someone else comfortably. They don't rush. They don't announce. They let price do the work. That environment is not present yet. Liquidity is the real exit door. Liquidity is what makes selling possible. When liquidity is thin, selling is dangerous. When liquidity is deep, selling is easy. The paradox is that liquidity feels best right before it disappears. Right now, silver liquidity is uneven. Futures trade, but physical flows are tight. Premiums remain elevated. Supply chains are not relaxed. That is not a market that invites large-scale exit. Why calm markets are often the most fragile? One of the most misunderstood signals in markets is calm. Low volatility is often mistaken for stability. In reality, it can signal suppression, not resolution. It tells you that forces are being balanced artificially or temporarily. True stability is noisy. It can absorb shocks. Suppressed stability cracks when stress exceeds tolerance. Silver still behaves like a market being managed, not one that has finished its cycle. The role of options and derivatives. Derivatives markets often reveal intent before spot prices do. In late cycle markets, options activity explodes, speculation increases, short-dated bets dominate. Everyone wants leverage. That is not what silver options currently reflect. Positioning remains cautious. Protection is still favored over aggression. This is not a crowd chasing the last move. Why inventory matters. More than sentiment can flip overnight. Inventory cannot. Physical inventory is slow to rebuild and expensive to ignore. When inventory pressure persists, it constrains behavior across the system. Producers hedge differently. Fabricators secure supply earlier. Traders avoid being short physical exposure. As long as inventory remains tight, the system prioritizes continuity over distribution. What a real exit phase would look like. When it is time to sell, the signals will be unmistakable. Volatility will rise sharply. Price will overshoot repeatedly. Premiums will compress aggressively. Inventory will rebuild quickly. Participation will broaden dramatically. You will hear about silver everywhere, and the narrative will change from scarcity to opportunity. That is when selling becomes rational. Why we are not there yet? We are still in a phase where silver is discussed selectively, not universally. Coverage is cyclical, not constant. Confidence is cautious, not euphoric. Markets don't end quietly, they end loudly. The cost of selling. Too early. Selling early feels prudent. It feels disciplined. It feels safe. But in structurally constrained markets, selling too early carries its own risk. You exit before imbalance resolves. You give up optionality before it is priced properly. Patience is not about greed. It is about letting the system reveal itself. What I'm watching, instead of price, I am watching behavior. I'm watching how stress is absorbed. I'm watching how supply responds. I am watching how institutions act when volatility spikes. Price will follow those signals. It always does. The discipline of waiting. Waiting is uncomfortable because it lacks validation. There are no alerts, no confirmations, no applause. But it is often the most professional position you can take. Not selling silver yet is not a bet on direction. It is a recognition that the cycle is unfinished. Why cycles don't end on headlines. Market. Cycles do not end because of a news event. Headlines create noise, not resolution. Cycles end when the underlying conditions that created pressure are removed. For silver, that pressure was never about excitement or speculation. It was about constraint. Constraint in supply chains, constraint in inventories, constraint in policy flexibility, constraint in trust. Until those constraints loosen, the cycle remains open. The macro shift that would change everything. The most important signal I'm watching is not in silver itself. It's in macro policy. Silver thrives when policymakers are boxed in, when inflation is persistent but growth is fragile, when debt is high and rate cuts are politically tempting but economically risky. If central banks were to regain true control, meaning stable real rates, credible inflation containment, and policy flexibility, silver's role would diminish. That environment does not exist yet. Why real rates still matter. More than price, silver does not compete with equities. It competes with confidence. As long as real rates remain unstable, as long as inflation expectations remain unanchored, and as long as debt levels constrain policy, silver retains relevance as a hedge against disorder. A sustained regime of positive, stable real rates would change that. We are not there. The debt constraint. No one can remove quickly. Global debt is not just high, it is structural. Governments cannot normalize policy aggressively without destabilizing their own balance sheets. That limits how far and how long tightening can go. This creates an environment of hesitation. Markets sense that hesitation. Silver benefits from it. Until debt is reduced or monetized decisively, that pressure remains unresolved. Why supply responses have been underwhelming. In a true late cycle market, supply surges. Producers expand aggressively. Projects accelerate. Inventory rebuilds. That is not happening meaningfully in silver. Mining expansion is slow, capital intensive, and politically constrained. Recycling responds to price, but with a lag. Industrial demand does not pause easily. Supply is not responding as it would in a completed cycle. That tells you something important. The industrial demand floor, silver is not just held. It is consumed. As long as industrial demand continues to grow or remain stable, it creates a floor that speculation alone cannot remove. Technological shifts do not reverse quickly. Electrification, energy transition, and manufacturing demand persist even through slowdowns. This floor matters. It means selling pressure must overwhelm not just investors, but industry. What a true resolution would look like. A true resolution would involve multiple changes happening together. Inventories would rebuild visibly. Premiums would compress globally. Supply chains would loosen. Central banks would regain credibility. Volatility would spike and then normalize. This would not be subtle. It would feel like relief. Why we're still in the middle, not the end. Right now, none of that has happened in full. We see partial tightening, we see episodic volatility, we see selective relief, but we do not see closure. Markets still feel tense, not resolved. The danger of confusing time with completion. One of the most common mistakes investors make is assuming that time alone completes cycles. It doesn't. Cycles end when conditions change, not when patience runs out. Silver has spent long periods doing nothing before. That does not mean the underlying pressures disappeared. It means they were being managed. We are still in a management phase. Why selling requires evidence, not boredom. Boredom is not a signal. Fatigue is not confirmation. Selling, because nothing is happening, is how people exit just before resolution. I sell when evidence changes. I wait when conditions persist. Right now, conditions persist. The psychological test of this phase. This is the phase that tests discipline, not the volatility, not the drawdowns, the waiting. Markets are designed to exhaust patience before they resolve pressure. This is not accidental. What I'm preparing for? Instead of preparing to sell, I'm preparing for transition. I'm watching for signs that silver's role in the system is changing, that it is no longer acting as a pressure valve. When that happens, selling becomes rational. Until then, selling is reactive. Why most people sell at the wrong time. Most people don't sell because the cycle ends. They sell because uncertainty becomes uncomfortable. They sell because price stalls. They sell because conviction fades. They sell because silence feels like failure. But markets don't reward comfort. They reward discipline. Silver does not punish impatience immediately. It waits. The professional difference is timing, not insight. Professionals are not smarter. They are not better informed. They are simply more patient. They do not try to predict tops. They wait for evidence. They wait for resolution. They wait for the system to change behavior. That is the entire difference. Why selling should feel obvious. When it is time to sell, it will not feel subtle. Liquidity will be abundant. Participation will be broad. Confidence will feel universal. The narrative will shift from caution to inevitability. That is when risk transfers safely. Why this is still a holding environment. Right now, none of that exists. We see hesitation. We see constraint. We see unresolved pressure. Holding silver in this environment is not a statement about upside. It is a statement about unfinished business. The discipline of not needing action. There's a powerful advantage in not needing to act. When you don't need to sell, you can wait for clarity. When you don't need validation, you can observe objectively. This is where most people fail. They confuse movement with progress. When I'm watching for the exit, I'm watching for a return of balance. I'm watching for inventories to normalize, for premiums to compress, for policymakers to regain control, for volatility to resolve, not spike. That is when silver's role ends. Why I don't argue with markets. Markets do not care about opinions. They care about pressure. As long as pressure exists, behavior remains distorted. When pressure resolves, behavior normalizes. Right now, behavior is still distorted. That tells me everything I need to know. Why this is not about being right. This is not about being right. It is about being aligned with structure. I'm not holding silver because I believe something dramatic will happen. I am holding because the conditions that would invalidate the position have not appeared. That is the only justification that matters. The cost of premature closure. Selling early provides emotional closure, but emotional closure is expensive. It costs optionality, it costs flexibility, it costs the ability to respond when the system finally moves. I don't pay that cost lightly. when I will change my mind. I will change my mind when evidence changes, not when price moves, not when headlines scream, not when sentiment flips, only when structure resolves. This is a position, not a prediction. Holding silver is not a prediction about the future. It is a response to the present. As long as the system remains constrained, fragmented, and fragile, silver remains relevant. When the system stabilizes, silver's role fades. That transition will not be subtle. Why patience still matters. Patience is not passive. It is active observation. It is choosing not to force an outcome. It is letting markets reveal themselves.